The world, Elara knew, was a library of forgotten things. Her life's work was to read its dust-covered pages. She was a chronicler, a keeper of a past that most of humanity had actively tried to forget. In the quiet halls of the great archives, she catalogued the remnants of a world before the Dragonfall, a world of soaring beasts, of magic-infused air, and of a raw, untamed power that had been extinguished in a final cataclysmic war. The dragons were gone, their existence reduced to faded tapestries and the brittle parchment of ancient scrolls. Elara, the last of her bloodline, was the only one who still listened for their echoes. Her days were a methodical rhythm of ink, paper, and the hushed scent of aged knowledge. She wore the simple gray robes of her order, her hair a loose braid down her back, and her hands were permanently stained with the ink of her trade. She was a creature of routine, finding solace in the predictable turn of a page, the satisfying thud of a book closing. Yet a restlessness had begun to stir within her. A whisper, faint but persistent, had been calling to her from the deepest, most unexplored sections of the archives. It was a cold whisper, not of words, but of a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the stone floors and settled in her bones. Today, the whisper was louder. It was a siren's call, pulling her past the familiar rows of books and into the restricted section, a wing that had been sealed for centuries. The air grew colder, the light dimmer, and the silence became a heavy weight. The hum grew into a low thrumming that seemed to emanate from the very stone of the walls. It led her to a massive, unassuming stone door, unlike any she had seen before. It was without hinges or a handle, seamless and ancient. Her fingers, usually steady, trembled as they traced the faint, almost invisible runes carved into the surface. She knew this was a boundary she should not cross. The archives were her sanctuary, her purpose. But the hum was a song in her blood, and she found herself reaching out, her hand hovering over the stone. A strange warmth bloomed on her palm, a feeling of connection she couldn't explain. The runes beneath her fingertips flared with a soft, ethereal blue light. With a groan of displaced stone, the massive door slid open, revealing not another archive, but a long, dark corridor leading into a deeper, colder part of the earth. The air that rushed out was thick with the scent of ozone and something else, something ancient, primal, and impossibly alive. Elara stepped inside, her lamp casting long, dancing shadows. The whisper became a roar, a silent scream of trapped power. She followed the twisting passage down, down, into the heart of the earth. The air grew heavy, the temperature dropping with every step. The scent of ozone intensified, and she could feel the thrumming in her very soul. She rounded a final corner and stopped, her breath catching in her throat. Before her, in the center of a vast cavernous chamber, was a man. He was chained. Massive obsidian chains of an unknown metal were wrapped around his wrists, his ankles, and his throat, anchoring him to the rough stone floor. He was a canvas of torment and power. His skin was the color of pale moonlight, and his hair was a shock of silver white that fell in a wild cascade around his shoulders. Scars, thin and white, webbed across his chest and arms, telling a silent story of a long, brutal fight. He was lean, but beneath the taut skin, the coiled muscles of a predator were visible. His face was a chiseled masterpiece of sharp angles and high cheekbones, but his eyes were a storm. They were a brilliant molten gold, a furious, untamed fire that burned with centuries of rage and despair. This was not just a man. This was a dragon, and he was the source of the terrible, beautiful sound that had called to her. He lifted his head, and their eyes met. The sheer, untamed power of his gaze knocked the air from her lungs. He was more than a creature. He was a force of nature, a thing of legend and fire, and he was staring directly at her. "What have you done?" he growled, his voice a low, resonant rumble that shook the very ground. It was the sound of shifting mountains and breaking stone, a voice born of fire and fury. "What have you done, little scholar?" Elara stood frozen, her lamp a small, trembling beacon in the vast darkness. The man, the dragon, was magnificent and terrifying. His body was a monument to both raw power and agonizing imprisonment. The chains she now saw were not just metal. They pulsed with a faint, malevolent light, humming with the same cold magic that had sealed the door. They were his prison, but also, she instinctively knew, the source of his tormented longevity. I don't know," she whispered, her voice a fragile thing in the immensity of the chamber. I was drawn here." Kael's lips, chapped and pale, curled into a sneer. "Drawn here by the echoes of a life you stole? The freedom you walk in, little ghost, is built on our ashes." His words were sharp, cutting. He was bitter, and the bitterness was a palpable thing, a heavy cloak of rage and despair. He pulled against his chains, the metal groaning in protest. He seemed to gather himself, his golden eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. "You are an archivist," he stated, his voice a low accusation. "You study the dead. Do you come to write a new chapter of my slow demise?" "No," Elara said, taking a step forward. "I came to find out what was calling me. I came to learn." She gestured to the surrounding chamber. The walls were not just stone. They were etched with glowing lines of magic, intricate and complex, weaving a protective, imprisoning web. "This is not a crypt. This is a prison. Who did this to you?" Kael let out a harsh, humorless laugh. "The very mages who feared us, who waged a war they could not win. They couldn't kill us all, so they trapped the last of us. They stole my power, they sealed my form, and they chained me to this rock for 1,000 years. I am the last dragon, and I am their final triumph." His gaze swept over her, a possessive, predatory appraisal that made her skin prickle. "And now you, a creature of dust and paper, have stumbled upon the end of a forgotten tale. So tell me, scholar, are you the one who will finish it? Will you be the one to finally turn out the lights?" Elara felt a fierce, unexpected defiance rise within her. She was a scholar, yes, but she was not heartless. She saw not a monster, but a man, a creature of profound suffering. "I am Elara," she said, her voice steady now, "and I am not here to finish anything. I am here to understand, and if I can, to help." Kael's golden eyes widened, a flicker of something unreadable, surprise. Disbelief, crossing his face. "Help? There is no help for me. There is no one left who remembers the old magic, the kind that can break these chains. This magic is a curse woven into my very essence. It is the end of my line, my eternal cage." "There is always a way," Elara insisted, her scholarly curiosity overriding her fear. She moved closer, cautiously, her eyes scanning the runes on his chains. They were unlike anything she had ever seen. They were not for binding, not in the traditional sense. They were for containment. She reached out, her fingers hovering an inch from the cold, glowing metal. "Don't," Kael warned, a low growl in his throat. "The magic will consume you." Ignoring his warning, Elara touched the chain. A jolt, like a static shock but 1,000 times more intense, coursed through her arm and into her chest. She gasped, a sudden vision flashing before her eyes. A mountain of fire, a sky filled with soaring silhouettes, and a sense of profound, earth-shaking freedom. Then, the vision vanished, leaving her breathless and shaking. Kael's chains had not consumed her. They had shown her a fragment of what he was, a piece of his lost power. He stared at her, his expression a mix of awe and bewilderment. No one had ever touched the chains and survived. "What was that?" he asked, his voice low and ragged. "An echo," Elara said, her hand still tingling. "The echo of a dragon's heart. It's a key, isn't it? The magic isn't meant to kill, it's meant to contain. To release it, you need a different kind of magic, a different kind of resonance." He watched her, a predator assessing its prey, but for the first time, a flicker of something other than hatred was in his gaze. The following days were a study in contradiction. The cold, dark chamber became Elara's new home. She brought him water, stale bread from her meager rations, and her books. Kael, suspicious and volatile, initially refused to accept anything from her, his pride a towering wall. But hunger and thirst were powerful motivators, and eventually he acquiesced, his eyes never leaving her as she placed the food and water just beyond his reach. "You are not a mage," he said one day, watching her pore over her texts by the light of her lamp. "So what are you, little scholar, that you can touch my curse and not burn?" "I am a chronicler," she repeated. "My family line has always been dedicated to the preservation of history. My bloodline. We were sworn to the dragons. We were the last to serve them before the war." Kael's eyes widened slightly, the information seeming to connect a 1,000-year-old puzzle piece in his mind. The keepers of lore. The ones who did not fight. The ones who watched and remembered. A ghost of a memory, of a gentle hand and a soft voice flickered across his face. She ignored the flicker of sentiment and got to the point. "These chains? They are not a prison. They are a focus. The magic is a parasitic spell that drains your essence to keep you human. To break it, we need to reverse the flow. We need to feed the magic, not starve it. But it needs the right kind of power. There is no power left, he sneered. The world is dead to magic. Not entirely, Elara said, her gaze fixed on a passage in an ancient text. There are traces of it in the ley lines, in the very earth. But it's dormant. What we need is a catalyst. A source. She looked up, her eyes meeting his. You are the source, Kael. But your power is locked away, dormant. We need to wake it up. The idea was audacious, bordering on insane. Kael looked at her as if she had grown a second head. You propose to awaken a dragon's fire in a chamber with a human? What happens when I lose control, little scholar? What happens when the dragon's fire returns and I burn this whole place and you with it to ash? Then it will be a glorious end, Elara said, her voice steady. But I don't believe that will happen. I believe you can control it. You've held it in for 1,000 years. He laughed, a sound that was a mix of a growl and a dry rattle. 1,000 years of holding a caged beast. Do you know what that does to a soul? It makes you crave the release of the fire more than anything else. It makes you want to watch the world burn, to see it taste the same ash that has filled my mouth for centuries. He spoke of his pain with a frightening, raw honesty. Elara felt a pang of pity, but she pushed it aside. This wasn't about pity. It was about purpose. She extended her hand not to his chains, but to him. Trust me, Kael, let me try. Kael stared at her hand, a small, pale thing against the harsh reality of his captivity. He slowly, deliberately reached out. His scarred hand, larger than hers, covered hers completely. His skin was warm, not hot, but the moment he touched her, a profound resonance echoed between them. It was a joining of souls, a bridge built between a keeper of memory and the last living remnant of that memory. The air in the chamber crackled, and the runes on his chains glowed with a new, furious intensity. He let out a sharp gasp, a primal sound of a creature long dormant coming back to life. A faint tremor shook the chamber. It was not the ground shaking. It was his power, stirring from its long slumber. Elara didn't pull away. She squeezed his hand, a silent promise. The first attempt was a failure, a spectacular, terrifying explosion of energy that knocked Elara against the stone wall. The chains had glowed white-hot, and Kael had screamed, a sound of agony and rage, as the magic rebounded and seared his human form. She had rushed to him, her hands trembling, to find his skin blistered and charred. The taste of failure was bitter, but she was not a woman to be deterred. She was a scholar. When one theory failed, you developed another. The next few days were spent nursing Kael's burns and studying the text with a frantic intensity. She realized her theory had been flawed. The magic wasn't just draining his essence. It was feeding on his emotional state. It thrived on his bitterness, his rage, his despair. The chains were not just a physical prison. They were an emotional one as well. To break them, she needed to touch him, not with an electrical jolt of power, but with a different kind of resonance. A resonance of trust, of gentleness, of human contact. She began to read to him, not from the dry historical texts, but from the lost tales of her ancestors, stories of the dragon's power and grace. She spoke of the mountains they had called home, the skies they had ruled, and the magic they had wielded. Kael listened in silence at first, his eyes closed, his face a mask of weary torment. But slowly, imperceptibly, the mask began to crack. He would ask questions, his voice still low and ragged, but tinged with a flicker of genuine curiosity. He spoke of his memories, of a world that existed only in her texts and in his heart. He spoke of the wind on his wings, the taste of the sun on his scales, and the earth-shattering power of his fire. He spoke of the day of the Dragonfall, of a sky filled with the screams of his kin and the flash of 1,000 mages' spells. He was a tapestry of scars and memories. And she was a scholar who was slowly, painstakingly learning to read him. Her fingers, once stained with ink, were now stained with the salve she applied to his burns. She would sit beside him, her hand on his arm, and she would simply talk to him. Of the quiet life she had led, of the books she had loved, of the simple joy of a sunrise. It was an intimacy born of necessity, of her need to understand and his need to be seen, to be heard, to be a memory instead of a ghost. Then came the day of the second attempt. This time Elara did not bring a text or a theory. She brought a simple meal of roasted root vegetables and water. She sat beside him and slowly, deliberately fed him. Her fingers brushed his lips as she held the spoon, and she saw the flicker in his golden eyes, not of rage, but of a desperate, agonizing vulnerability. The touch was a small kindness, a drop of water in a desert of 1,000 years. When they were finished, she didn't move away. She placed her hand on his chest, right over his heart, and for the first time, he didn't tense. She felt the steady, powerful thrum of his heartbeat beneath her palm. It was a dragon's heart, she knew, and it beat with a fierce, untamed rhythm. "Kael," she said, her voice a soft murmur. "Let go of the anger. Let go of the pain. Let your heart remember what it was like to be free. Let it remember the fire." He closed his eyes, and a single tear, a line of liquid silver, traced a path down his cheek. He was not a stone monument of rage. He was a creature of immense sadness. He was the last of his kind, and he was profoundly alone. He took her hand, this time of his own volition, and placed it on his chest, right over the center of his chest. "I can't," he whispered, his voice broken. "The rage is all I have left." "No," Elara said, a fierce conviction in her voice. "You have me, and you have the memory of your past. Let's use it. Let's use the fire to burn these chains to dust." She reached out with her other hand and touched the glowing, humming chains. This time, there was no jolt of pain, no vision of fire. This time she felt the flow of the magic. She felt the bitter, sorrowful resonance of it, and she poured her own energy into it, not with the intention to break, but to heal. She sent a feeling of peace, of acceptance, of a profound and gentle connection. Kael's breath hitched, and a soft golden light began to emanate from his very skin, a warmth that filled the chamber, pushing back the cold. The runes on the chains began to glow, not with the previous cold, malevolent light, but with a brilliant, golden warmth. The sound of a 1,000-year-old curse began to fade, replaced by a low, rumbling thrum. The magic was not fighting her. It was accepting her, responding to the purity of her purpose. It was not a battle of wills. It was a joining of souls. Slowly, painstakingly, the chains began to melt. They didn't break or shatter. They dissolved into golden motes of light, 1,000 years of imprisonment turning to dust. One by one, the chains fell away, from his ankles, his wrists, and finally, the one around his throat. Kael let out a ragged, trembling breath. The last chain fell to the ground, a puddle of shimmering dust. He looked down at his free hands, flexed his fingers, and then looked at Elara, his golden eyes wide with shock and disbelief. You did it," he breathed, his voice rich and full, the low, guttural rumble of a dragon finally given voice. "You freed me." He was free, a creature of raw, untamed power unchained. But as he looked at her, his expression was not of a predator finally released. It was of a creature seeing the sun for the first time in 1,000 years, his face a mixture of wonder, gratitude, and a fierce, possessive love that was just beginning to stir. The scholar had unchained the dragon, and in doing so, she had bound him to her forever. The silence in the chamber was no longer heavy. It was a vast, open space filled with the potential of 1,000 years. Kael stood free, his body no longer weighed down by the curse, but a different kind of burden had settled upon him. He was a creature unchained, yet he found himself tethered by a thread of something he could not name, a fierce and tender vulnerability he had never known. He looked at his hands, no longer scarred and broken, but strong and whole. The healing had been instantaneous, a byproduct of the curse's dissolution. He was in his human form, but he could feel the dragon, the raw, ancient power, thrumming just beneath his skin, waiting. It was a sensation of profound relief and terrifying chaos. His gaze found Elara, and the sheer intensity of it made her take a half-step back. He reached out, his hand trembling as he gently cupped her cheek. His thumb brushed her skin, and a wave of warmth, not of magic, but of a purely human touch washed over her. It was a new world for them both. "You are not a scholar," he murmured, his voice a low, resonant purr that vibrated through her. "You are a healer. You saw past the monster and found the man." Elara's own hand came up to rest on his, holding it against her face. "You were never a monster, Kael. You were just broken." He let out a ragged breath, the sound of a 1,000-year-old dam finally breaking. He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. He was taller than she, and his proximity was overwhelming. A mix of the elemental power of a dragon and the heartbreaking fragility of a man who had not been touched with kindness in an age. The scent of ozone and something akin to a crisp mountain storm filled her senses. "I am broken no longer," he said, the words a vow, "and I am in your debt." "There is no debt," she said softly. "Just a shared history." Their moment of intimacy, born of their unique connection, was shattered by the sound of a stone sliding open above them. They both froze. The great archives were meant to be silent, to be a tomb for forgotten things. The sound was a trespass. Kael's body went rigid, the primal instincts of a hunted creature returning. His golden eyes narrowed to slits, scanning the darkness beyond their small pool of light. "We are not alone," he hissed, his voice a low, warning growl. They were in a hidden chamber beneath the archives, a place no one should have known existed. The very fact that someone was here meant that their secret was no longer their own. Kael's power, his newly returned freedom, was a beacon in a world that had tried to extinguish it. He had a choice now, to stay and fight or to flee. But he was not a creature of hiding. A dark, dangerous glint entered his eyes, a flicker of the same rage that had sustained him for a millennium. He grabbed Elara's hand, his grip surprisingly gentle for his size, and pulled her into the shadows just as a party of armored figures, their lanterns casting dancing shadows, descended into the chamber. The leader was a man with the cold, calculating eyes of a politician and the sigil of the Dragon Wardens, the very order that had sealed Kael away, emblazoned on his armor. "The resonance," the leader said, his voice a crisp command. "It led us here. The last dragon's magic is returning." Kael's grip tightened on Elara's hand. He felt the familiar, consuming rage begin to swell in his chest. 1,000 years of bitterness and hatred for the very order that had imprisoned him. He wanted to unleash the fire, to burn them all to ash, but he felt Elara's hand in his, a small anchor holding him to his humanity. He looked down at her, at the fear in her eyes that was not for him, but for him. He saw a fleeting vision of her gentle touch, her voice reading to him, her belief that he could be more than just a monster. He would not let the rage consume him. Not now. He would fight, yes, but not with the untamed fury of the past. He would fight with purpose, with a new fierce need to protect the one person who had given him back his soul. The Dragon Wardens, now a mere shadow of the powerful order they once were hunting a ghost. They were not expecting to find a man. The leader, Commander Valerius, was a man of logic and order. He did not believe in magic, only in the power of the institutions that had sealed it away. His discovery of a living, breathing, unchained dragon was an impossibility that shook him to his core. Kael and Elara remained hidden in the shadows, their presence a silent, terrifying weight in the chamber. The wardens moved with a practiced efficiency, their steel-clad boots echoing on the stone floor. They were searching for a magical artifact, a relic, not the last dragon himself. "The magic is here," Valerius said, his voice laced with a tremor of awe and fear. "The resonance is stronger than we ever imagined. The spell is unraveling." He held a strange crystal device that pulsed with a faint blue light, mirroring the glow of the dissolved runes on the floor. It was a new kind of magic, a different kind of tool to fight a different kind of war. Kael saw it for what it was, a weapon, designed to sense and contain his power. He had no choice. He could not fight his way out without exposing Elara to a kind of danger she had no defenses against. He had to lead them away. He had to draw their attention to him, and him alone. He moved, a swift, silent blur in the darkness. He emerged from the shadows behind the wardens, his movements fluid and deadly. The first guard didn't even have time to scream. Kael's hand, a blur of motion, snaked out and snapped his neck. The body fell with a soft thud. The sound was an earthquake in the silent chamber. "We have him!" Valerius shouted, raising his own sword. "He is here!" Kael didn't wait for them. He moved, his body a weapon of honed instinct and centuries of pent-up power. He was a force of nature, a dance of death and shadows. He did not use magic, but the raw, unadulterated strength of a creature designed to be a predator. He was a whirlwind of blows and blocks, disarming and incapacitating the wardens with a terrifying speed. Elara watched in a horrified fascination. This was the true Kael, the one not caged by a curse. This was the raw, untamed fire that had been simmering beneath the surface. He was beautiful and terrible, a living monument to a forgotten age of power. Valerius, the only one left standing, faced him, his sword trembling in his hand. He was not a fighter. He was a scholar of magic, a keeper of a political order. He looked at Kael, at the glowing golden eyes and the wild silver hair, and he saw, not a man, but the embodiment of all the ancient evils his order had sworn to destroy. "You are a plague," Valerius hissed, his face pale with a mix of terror and fanaticism. "An abomination. We will not let you return." "I am the last of my kind," Kael said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "And I have come to remind the world what it has forgotten." He didn't need to fight Valerius. He needed to escape. He used a flicker of his newly returned magic, a small pulse of energy that sent a blinding flash of light from his hands. Valerius screamed, dropping his crystal device and his sword. Kael grabbed Elara's hand and pulled her toward the opening of the chamber. They ran, leaving the blinded, screaming wardens behind. They emerged into the night, into the cold, clean air of the city. They were no longer hidden. Their very presence was a challenge, a new war in a world that thought its battles were over. Kael's hand was a warm, possessive anchor as he pulled her through the winding cobblestone streets. He was the dragon, and she was the keeper of his secret, the key to his power. And they were now fugitives in a world that would never be able to forget them again. The city of Arcanus was a sprawling maze of ancient stone and narrow alleys, built on the bones of a civilization that had feared and revered magic in equal measure. They were no longer in the silent, hidden passages of the archives. They were out in the open, exposed and hunted. Elara, a creature of quiet routine, found herself on the run, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was running from the very order she had served her entire life. Kael was her guide and her protector. His instincts were those of a predator in its natural habitat. He knew the shadows, he knew the hidden passages, the forgotten tunnels that snaked beneath the city. He pulled her along, his hand a constant, reassuring weight in hers. He was not just a man anymore. He was a creature of myth, moving with a silent, deadly grace that was both beautiful and terrifying. He led her to a part of the city she had only ever heard of in whispers, the underbelly, a warren of criminals, outcasts, and those who dabbled in forbidden arts. It was a place where old magic was not feared, but bartered and bought in hushed tones. They found refuge in a dilapidated inn, a place reeking of stale ale and human desperation. The room was small, with a single threadbare bed and a window overlooking a grimy alley. They were alone for the first time since their escape. The silence between them was not a comfortable one. It was filled with the unspoken questions and the heavy weight of their new reality. Elara looked at him, truly looked at him, in the dim light of the single candle. He was no longer a broken and chained creature. He was a being of immense power, and he was hers. He was the last dragon, and she, a simple scholar, was now his only connection to the world of men. His golden eyes were no longer filled with a burning rage, but a new complex emotion she couldn't quite decipher. "What now?" she asked, her voice a small, fragile thing in the immensity of their situation. "We find a way to get out of the city," he said, his voice low and serious. "The wardens will be searching every inch of this place for us. They will not stop. They cannot afford to let the world know a dragon still lives. And after that?" she asked, her gaze steady. He didn't answer right away. He moved closer, his form a dark silhouette in the candlelight. He reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. His touch was so soft, so tentative, as if he were afraid she would shatter. "After that," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "we find a way to break the final curse. The one that keeps me in this skin." Elara's breath caught in her throat. "What final curse?" "The one that binds me to this form," he said, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. "The wardens did not just imprison me. They sealed my true form. They believed that if they could keep me human, they could control me. But it is my true form, my dragon self, that is the source of my magic, my power. To break the last of their spell, I must become a dragon again. And to do that, I will need you." He was not asking. He was stating a fact. He was laying out the dangerous, terrifying truth of their intertwined destinies. He needed her to be the bridge between his human heart and his dragon soul. And if you become a dragon? She asked, her heart a frantic drumbeat in her chest. He paused, his golden eyes searching hers. The raw, untamed fire flickered in their depths. Then I will be a monster again, he said, his voice laced with a bitter truth. The one they always knew I was. But I will be free. He was giving her an escape, a chance to turn back, to run from the creature he was about to become. He was offering her the choice to leave the story before it became a tragedy. I am a chronicler, Kael, she said, her voice filled with a conviction that even she did not know she possessed. I am here to tell your story, not to run from it. I am not afraid. She reached out, her hand finding his. She laced her fingers through his, a silent promise. She was his keeper, his partner, his last desperate hope. She was a scholar who had chosen to be a part of the history she was meant to record. And in that simple act, she had forged a bond that was stronger than any chain. Their journey to find a way to break the final curse led them deep into the criminal underbelly of Arcanus. They moved in shadows, their existence a secret whispered among thieves and merchants of illicit goods. Kael was a silent, formidable presence, his senses sharper than any man's, his instincts a honed weapon in the chaos of the city. He did not trust anyone, but he trusted Elara, and that was all that mattered. Elara, for her part, was a guide in this new, dangerous world. Her scholarly knowledge of ancient lore was invaluable. She knew of the forgotten magic, the old ways that existed outside the sanctioned power of the wardens. She knew of a hidden society of mages, the remnants, who had survived the Dragonfall and lived in the city's depths, keeping the old ways alive. They were the key to Kael's final freedom. They found them in a hidden temple beneath a ruined market, a place where the air hummed with a different kind of magic, a raw, untamed power that made Kael's golden eyes glow. The leader of the remnants was a woman named Lysandra, her face a roadmap of ancient lines and her eyes a kaleidoscope of colors that swirled with hidden power. She looked at Kael, and she saw him for what he was, a being of immense power. She bowed, a gesture of respect and deference. "The last dragon," she said, her voice a soft, melodious hum. "We have been waiting for you." Kael's eyes narrowed in suspicion. "You were waiting for me? To do what? To be another one of your political pawns?" "No," Lysandra said, her eyes settling on Elara. "We were waiting for the one who would free you. The curse on you is not just a prison, it is a key. The magic of your dragon form was sealed within, and the key to unlocking it is a binding of two souls. A merging of two very different kinds of power." "What are you saying?" Elara asked, her heart sinking with a terrible, dawning realization. "She is saying," Kael said, his voice laced with a sudden, fierce protectiveness, "that to break my curse, I need to take your magic, your life force, that my dragon form will be unleashed only when your human one has been consumed." Lysandra's expression was one of profound regret. The curse was designed to be permanent. To break it requires a sacrifice, a powerful, willing one. Your magic is not like ours. It is pure, ancient, and bound to the earth itself. It is a conduit, a vessel. You are the vessel that will pour its essence into him, and in doing so, you will... She did not finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Elara would not survive. The price of Kael's freedom was her life. Kael let out a roar of pure, unadulterated fury. The temple shook. The very air crackled with the raw, terrifying power that had been unleashed. "You will not touch her," he thundered, his voice a sound of shifting mountains and breaking stone. "You will not take her from me." He was a storm of rage and fear. He had been a prisoner for 1,000 years. He had endured a loneliness that transcended time. He had been a creature of rage and despair. And now he had found his soul, his purpose, his only reason for being. He had found Elara, and he would not sacrifice her for his own freedom. Elara was not afraid. She was a scholar of history, and she knew that the greatest stories often came with the greatest price. She stepped forward, a small, fragile figure in the path of the tempest that was Kael's rage. She placed her hand on his chest, a gesture of silent, unyielding purpose. "Kael," she said, her voice a calm, steady counterpoint to the storm. "I am a chronicler. My life's purpose has been to tell your story. And what is a story without an ending? We knew this would not be easy. We knew there would be a cost." His golden eyes, filled with a tormented fire, met hers. He was a creature of fierce, possessive love, a dragon who would sooner sacrifice his own freedom than lose the one who had given it to him. "No," he said, his voice low and broken. "I will not lose you. I cannot," she smiled, a sad, serene curve of her lips. "You won't lose me," she said. "I will be with you. In the fire, in the echo, in the very soul of the last dragon." He looked at her, at the absolute, unwavering conviction in her eyes. She was a woman of logic and reason, and she was choosing to believe in a myth, in a love that was 1,000 years in the making. He was the last of his kind, but she was the keeper of his legacy. He was the fire, but she was the fuel that would allow it to burn once more. He had been a man of rage and despair, and she had shown him what it was to love. And he knew, with a certainty that transcended time, that he could not be free without her. The air in the hidden temple was thick with the weight of an impossible decision. Lysandra, the ancient mage, had laid out the truth. Kael's final freedom came at the cost of Elara's life. The curse was designed with a cruel elegance, a binding spell that drew its power from a conduit, a human soul with a deep ancestral connection to the dragons. Elara's lineage, her very essence, was the key. Kael stood rigid, a statue carved from fury and despair. The ancient power of his dragon form, so recently reawakened, was a raw storm within him. He had spent a millennium in chains, dreaming of the day he would feel the earth beneath his true form and the wind on his wings. But that dream was a hollow promise if it meant Elara would be lost to him. He looked at her, a small, courageous figure who held his entire world in her hands. "There must be another way," he growled, the sound a low, resonant rumble that shook the dust from the temple's rafters. "There must be another sacrifice." Lysandra's eyes, a swirling vortex of ancient magic, held a profound sorrow. "There is no other way, last dragon. The curse is a living thing. It demands a specific soul, a specific resonance. It demands her." Elara stepped forward, her hand finding Kael's, her touch a calming anchor to his storm. "This is not a sacrifice," she said, her voice filled with a serene conviction. "This is a conclusion. My life's purpose was to find you, to understand you, to preserve your story. How could I do that without helping you write the final chapter?" "Because the final chapter is your end." Kael's voice was broken, a ragged sound of a creature who had lost too much to lose anything else. He clutched her hand, his grip fierce and possessive. He would sooner turn and burn the temple to ash, turn the city to cinders, than let a single hair on her head be harmed. Lysandra watched them, her expression unreadable. "The wardens are searching for you, last dragon. They know you are unchained. They will not rest until they have hunted you down and destroyed you. This is your only chance for true freedom." Kael's gaze hardened. He knew she spoke the truth. He was a hunted beast, and the wardens would use any means necessary to capture him. But freedom without Elara was a prison of a different kind. He looked at the gentle, unwavering faith in her eyes, and he knew he could not take her life for his own. He would fight the wardens, he would die if he had to, but he would not let the curse take her. "Then we will find a different way," he said, his voice a quiet, steel-hard vow. "I will not let you be destroyed for my sake." They left the temple and returned to the shadowed underbelly of the city, their purpose now changed. Kael was no longer seeking his freedom. He was seeking a way to defy a millennia-old curse. Elara was no longer simply a chronicler. She was a partner in this impossible fight, her scholarly mind racing to find a loophole in a magic that was designed to have none. They spent days in the labyrinthine tunnels and forgotten libraries of the remnants, poring over ancient texts, their fingers tracing the faded ink of forgotten spells. Elara discovered a fragment of a lore that spoke of a different kind of magic, a kind that was not of power, but of love. It was a kind of magic that was a myth, a legend, a fairy tale in a world that had long forgotten such things. It was the magic of a soul-binding ritual, an ancient, forbidden spell that could merge two beings into one, not in a destructive sense, but in a complete and total union. "This is it," Elara said one day, her voice a breathless whisper, her hand tracing the words on the brittle parchment. "This is the way. The curse is designed to consume my life force. But what if my life force is not consumed but given? What if it is not taken from me but shared?" Kael looked at the text, his golden eyes burning with a fierce, desperate hope. "A merging of two souls," he read aloud, his voice low with wonder. "It is a myth, a tale from a time when our races lived in harmony. But it's real, Elara insisted. It is a magic that defies the logic of power. It is a magic that is born from an absolute and selfless love. It will not destroy me, Kael. It will make me a part of you. It will make our souls one. The choice was no longer about life or death. It was about a complete and total surrender of self. It was a terrifying prospect for a man who had been a prisoner for a millennium and for a woman who had lived a life of quiet solitude. But they were no longer just a man and a woman. They were two parts of a greater whole. They were the keeper and the last of a forgotten race. Their destinies intertwined forever. The ritual was to be performed in the heart of the city, in a place where the ley lines converged, a place of immense untapped magical power. The remnants, led by Lysandra, who now saw the truth of their love and the audacity of their plan, agreed to help. They were the keepers of the old ways, and this was the oldest way of all. Chapter 11. The Merging of Souls. The night of the ritual was a symphony of magic and light. The city was a sprawling tapestry of shadows and noise, but beneath it, in the hidden heart of the old temple, a new kind of magic was being born. Lysandra and the other mages of the remnants stood in a circle, chanting in a language that was older than memory itself. Their magic hummed, a gentle, nurturing current that pulsed with the beat of the city's heart. Kael and Elara stood in the center of the circle, facing each other. The air was thick with power and with the unspoken emotions that had passed between them. Kael's golden eyes held a profound depth of love and a raw, vulnerable fear. Elara's eyes were filled with a serene, unshakable faith. "Are you certain?" Kael whispered, his hand finding hers. "Once we begin, there is no turning back." "I am certain," she said, her voice a calm, steady counterpoint to the storm. "This is where my story ends, Kael, and where yours truly begins." He closed his eyes, and a single tear, a line of liquid silver, traced a path down his cheek. He was a creature of fire and raw power, and she had shown him what it was to feel, to love, to be human. The mages' chanting grew louder. The magic in the temple intensified, and a soft, golden light began to emanate from Elara. It was not a destructive light, but a nurturing one, a living, breathing thing. The light began to flow from her and into Kael, a river of pure, radiant energy. The curse on him, the one that kept him in his human form, began to unravel, not with a destructive snap, but with a gentle, harmonious sigh. Kael let out a sharp gasp as he felt the essence of her, the very soul of her, pouring into him. He felt her knowledge of the world, her love for the forgotten stories, her compassion for a world that had forgotten how to love. He felt the pure, untainted magic of her bloodline, the sacred vow of her ancestors to protect and serve. He felt her in his very bones, in his very heart. His body began to change. His human form shimmered and wavered, and a soft golden light consumed him. The last chains of the curse, the invisible ones that bound his spirit, shattered into a million motes of light. The air filled with the scent of ozone and fire, and in the place of the man there was a being of immense, breathtaking beauty. He was a dragon. Not a beast of fire and rage, but a creature of impossible grace and power. His scales were a soft, luminous gold, and his eyes, still filled with the love for her, were two burning suns. He was magnificent, a living tapestry of myth and legend. He lowered his massive head, his golden eyes meeting hers. She was still standing in the center of the circle, a small, fragile figure, her body now translucent, shimmering with the fading light of her essence. She was a ghost, a beautiful echo. "Elara," he rumbled, his voice a sound of shifting mountains and breaking stone, but filled with a love so profound it hurt to hear. "You are free," she whispered, her voice a fading whisper of a fading memory. "The last dragon is free," she smiled, a sad, ethereal curve of her lips, and in a single, final breath, she dissolved into 1,000 golden motes of light, a star shower of pure magic that flowed not into the air, but into Kael. The temple was silent. The mages, standing witness, watched in reverent awe. In the center of the circle, Kael stood, his dragon form a monument to a love that had defied a curse. He had her within him. He felt her laughter, her quiet joy, her fierce, unwavering spirit. He felt her love, a constant, comforting warmth in his very soul. He was not just the last dragon. He was the keeper of her memory, her soul, her echo. He looked up, his golden eyes seeing the world not as a human, but as a dragon. He saw the ley lines, the veins of magic that ran beneath the earth. He saw the very heart of the world, and he felt the immense, profound power of it. He was a part of it now. He was free, but he was not whole. He felt the raw, primal power of a dragon, but he felt the absence of her touch, the lack of her gentle human presence. He had her soul, but he had lost her hand. He was a creature of myth, but he was also a creature of profound, unshakable grief. He let out a low, mournful roar, a sound that was a mix of the joy of his freedom and the pain of his loss. It was a roar that was felt throughout the city, a tremor that shook the very foundations of the world. It was a sound that told the world that the last dragon had returned, and he was no longer a prisoner of men. He was a creature of fire and sorrow, and he had come to claim his place. He looked at Lysandra, his eyes filled with a new kind of power, a new kind of purpose. "The wardens," he said, his voice a low, burning command. "Where are they?" He was no longer a hunted beast. He was the hunter. He would not hide. He would not flee. He was a dragon now, and a dragon did not run. He was the living embodiment of a lost era, a beautiful, terrifying reminder of a magic the world had forgotten. And he would remind them of her. He would be the echo of her gentle, human spirit in a world that had tried to extinguish them both. He was Kael, the last dragon, and he carried Elara, the chronicler, in his heart. Their story was not over. It had just begun. He would be a legend, a myth, a creature of fire and shadow, and she would be the quiet, constant echo in his soul, the love that fueled his fire and the memory that made him human. He was free, and in his freedom, he was a monument to the woman who had dared to love a dragon.